Hello, everyone. I'll just give you a moment to trickle in. We've got a lot of people joining us today, which is very exciting. Okay, great. I think we'll get started. We've got a lot to get through. So hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session, Fraud-Proof Finance, How Top CFOs Protect Every Dollar. My name is Shauna. I'm part of the ANZ CFO community and the marketing team here at Weel. In today's session, we're going to explore how leading finance teams are prepping for 2026. We'll look at the evolving external threat environment and the often overlooked internal risks within the finance function and broader businesses. You'll hear what top performing organisations are doing, that's working in practice, and how you can build the resilience needed to protect every dollar across your finance operation. Before we get started, I'm going to run through a little bit of housekeeping. Now, we want this session to be interactive, so please feel free to ask questions. To do that, you can use the chat function at the bottom of the screen in the Zoom panel. You can also use the QA function, and we'll get to those questions at the end of the session. This session will run for an hour, and if you have to dip out, not to worry, we will send you a copy of the recording afterwards. Now, we're going to start off with a quick poll. Sorry, I'm operating this. That's why it takes a moment. We'll bring that up. How would you rate your organization's overall fraud resilience today? Just love to do a bit of a temperature check. And I'd be interested to see if you feel the same way at the end of it as well. Great. Okay, so majority of people are feeling fairly resilient, but room for improvement, which is fantastic because hopefully this session will help with how you can do that. Great. Okay, now it's time for some introductions. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Shauna. I'm part of the ANZ CFO community and also Weel's marketing team. I've been at Weel for just over 3 years, and I'm very fortunate to have led many of our events, including our annual CFO Summit, different webinars such as today's session, trade shows and roundtables. Today, we're excited to be joined by Nick Decker, VP of Marketing at Eftsure, and Damon Hornstein, CFO and COO at Weel. Nick, I'll start with you. Could you give us a bit of an overview of Eftsure and your role there?
Yeah, sure. And thank you for the introduction and having us as a guest at your webinar and community. Always appreciate the collaboration. So my name is Nick Decker. I'm the VP of Marketing at Eftsure. Eftsure, for those who aren't familiar, which hopefully no one on this call, everybody should be familiar on this call. I've been in marketing for 5 years. I hope I've done a good job so far. So if you are not familiar with Eftsure, we protect vendor payments. So any payments that you send to another organization, we make sure that it ends up with the right recipient. We do that now globally as well. That's new. We have about 3,500 customers that use our services and rely on us. So yeah, we're pretty certain about what we do, and hopefully to provide a bit of information about that.
Fantastic. Thanks, Nick. And Damon, I'll hand over to you if you could give us a bit of an overview of Weel and your role here.
Yes, so Damon Hornstein, CFO and COO at Weel. Background, spent just over a decade in investment banking, M&A advisory at Citigroup, so working with boards, CEOs, CFOs on their strategy, on their capital raising, on their M&A activities. And then joined Weel just under 4 years ago to help scale up this business. So get to continue the same sort of things I was doing, working with finance leaders, CFOs, and boards to help them drive financial efficiencies throughout their organization and get lots of great insights, which hopefully I can share with the audience today from those conversations. Weel, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a spend management platform. We help businesses to manage their spend across cards, reimbursements, accounts payable. Really smart system, lots of great AI functionality being shipped into the product to help finance teams unlock more of their time and spend more time on the strategic pieces. So yeah, great product. About 3,000 customers, doing about $1 billion of transactions today. So yeah, very exciting company to be a part of, and community events like this, Sean, are a great way for us to give something back to those that share their insights with us. So looking forward to the chat today.
Yeah, definitely. Me too. Thanks for that, Damon. So we're going to begin today's session with a spotlight on external risks, the changing threat landscape, and how you can protect your organization. Nick, I'll hand over to you to kick us off today.
Oh, now my sound is also grayed out, Damon. I don't know how that happened, but okay. Anyways, we'll share the slide.
Cool.
All right. Thank you for that introduction. As mentioned, like when it's about external fraud and it's in the payment space, there's this one question that is like really important. It's like the underlying problem. It's like, how do you know who's on the other side of the computer when you're communicating with someone? And how do you know that when you pay someone that is still the right person as well? So how do you verify that? How do you know that information isn't being taken away from you? So there's been a problem for a really long time. This is the question that we solve at Eftsure. But only recently, AI has further increased the risk of that as well. So all the scams that were possible before and impersonating someone have now become like even more treacherous. And Sam Altman, CEO at OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, this is one of his biggest fears that he says. It's like having the bad actors be there before the good actors can have preventative measures in place. So he predicts a fraud crisis as this happens. We're a bit more positive. We think that as AI is evolving, yes, cyber criminals are using this a lot, this technology, and I'm going to give you some like real examples of what's currently out there. But there's also in the prevention has become cheaper as well. So there's good news as well. So just to summarize that and where we sit as Eftsure as a company, for that, there's all these hacks, and they happen like on a global level. Business email compromise, I'm sure you've heard about that. Fake invoices, the insider scams. I think Damon is going to talk a little bit more about that today. AI scams and password phishing. So what we do at Eftsure is making sure that we prevent you against all this fraud, whether they come from overseas or from domestic companies. And we do that from the moment you onboard a new vendor to the moment you click pay. We make sure that you have access to accurate data all the time. So it's really important to do that. And we can do that by an illustration of the numbers that we see globally. These numbers, they're pretty scary, and I don't want to dwell on them for too long because they're macro numbers and not immediately affect you as a business. But it just shows that like this cyber crime and cyber security is a growing industry, growing space, and we hear it more and more over the past few years that it's become more of a board topic than that it was before as well. Companies, especially like now, and I think like the Optus data breach and the Medibank data breach, the silver lining of those incidents is that boards are paying a lot more attention to their security posture as well. And part of that is like that these numbers are growing and the business risk is inflating. If we look on like what that will look like in Australia, just to give you a bit of an idea of what the numbers here are, about every 6 minutes, the ACCC receives a report for a scam. So there's any Australian that gets scammed. It could be a romance scam, it could be a business being scammed. Any form of cybercrime is reported every 6 minutes. It's estimated to cost the Australian economy $2.7 billion annually, as the estimated economic damages for that. And then the ACCC also reports on business email compromise. So really the frauds that we see happen the most often to businesses. And they were reported like $91 million worth of losses. Now, we know, looking at our own data, protecting 3,500 customers, we know that this number is highly underreported if we lay it across our own data and our own experiences. The reason for that is that businesses aren't required to report any losses due to BEC. There's still a lot of shame around that as well. So finance teams don't want to report it. But we estimate, like looking at our data and a bit of guesstimation, we think that that number is closer to 5x what it gets reported to the ACCC. And that's like quite conservative, yes. So that's a bit of like laying the landscape of when it comes to external fraud. I want to talk to you about, and this is making the conversation a little bit more tangible than what you usually get in these type of presentations. Really want to go deep into like who's behind this. I think if you understand how these threats happen, the tools that are being used, you can give it your own risk score, and you can take action accordingly. So really want to dive deep into the hacker groups, how they operate, and then some of the handholds for a response as well. So let's just dive into that. For the hacker groups, unfortunately, Hollywood has done us a massive disservice. So the people that are after your payments and that are actively attacking you, they are not like the guys in a hoodie in a basement and with matrix-like screens like moving around. No, these are like well-organized groups. And on the next slide, I tried to give you a bit of like substance to who these groups are. So these are groups that are known on the dark web. I think one of them that really stands out and that some of you may have heard about is Lazarus Group. They were involved in the world's biggest heist today. They stole $1.4 billion worth of Bitcoin, or a cryptocurrency, from a company called Bybit. They're North Korean funded and quite active at the moment. So these are some of the groups. They got these cool names either from law enforcement or they gave it themselves. And if you have to draw a line, which is in reality a lot messier than what is represented on this slide, but you can identify two groups of cybercrimes, of hacker groups. So you have the technical ones. They try to breach into IT systems. They're part of, like, they deploy ransomware and make sure that like all your data in your organization is locked and that you have to pay them a ransom. And these guys, they operate more like modern tech companies. So they have like developers, they have pen testers, they have a management layer, and they also sell that technology to other groups as well. And then you have these non-technical groups, and these are the groups that are mainly in the fraud and the social engineering scams. And the best way to describe that is to compare them to a sales team or a recruitment team, where there's a flat hierarchy. It's usually one or two people at the top, and then they have a lot of people with revenue targets to hit, trying to do that via social engineering. So really interesting, a study from IT Guru. They did a study on like how much would it cost, the startup cost, to become like a cyber criminal, and they came down to $128 to get your full kit of the dark web technology. So what we see as well is, like, as cybercrime is evolving and the tools are evolving, the scams are getting more effective, but also like the barriers to entry are getting lower. There's no technical skill required anymore to become a hacker. These tools are out of the box and they're pretty cheap, so anyone can start. And if you compare these costs to like legitimate software vendors and what they charge, I bet most of you get to see these receipts. It's probably a lot more than $128 just to get started on a starter license. So that's a bit of like a problem. We're seeing this trend happening and more people getting involved in it. So really want to paint a picture of like who these groups are. And we can do that by a research that has been done by Agari. Agari is a threat intelligence collection company, and they got a huge report on a group called Fin7. So we got all this data because, as you can see, at the countries, it's mainly consisting of Ukrainian and Russian members. And when the war broke out, one of the Ukrainian members leaked all the information and all the chat history of the group to the FBI. So there's a wealth of information, and it gives a really rare insight into the operations of these groups. So this is the org chart of this group. Comes with like a management layer. They're named by like their identities. What was really interesting as well, beyond like the developers, the management layer, and the affiliates that they work with, they also worked with a legitimate cyber security companies. So they set up phony cybersecurity companies where the people that work there were actually thinking that they were helping companies become safer. But what they were actually doing, they were writing code to then be used for malicious intent. And the money that they thought they were getting paid through that company was actually money laundered through that organization as well. So it gives you a bit of an idea how creative these people are. It's very creative people in cybercrime, which is interesting because when the like we as like the finance community, we're usually a bit more like process driven, and a creative accountant is good to have to some extent, but not always great. So you have these really creative people coming in, trying to get your processes, and they also don't have any ethics, very low ethics in these organizations. So this is one of the messages. It's literally translated from Russian, sorry, and it paints the picture of like how these people treat each other within these groups. So there's no time to train anyone. You have to earn money today. We'll kill your parents or relatives if you don't. All information about you is in the databases. We know exactly who you are. Ukraine is a mess. We'll go there. So yes, no ethical standards, highly creative people. And then they're also very well funded. So this group, the 47 that you saw in that org chart, they've been responsible for about 8,000 victims across the globe, incidents that they were involved with. And that's an estimation from the information that they have internally. That's about $1 billion of economic damages. So the revenue per person in that network is incredible. They have a lot of access to money, and they use that to hire the best talent as well. So the takeaway from that is like adversaries are creative, low ethics, and very wealthy people. That's the ones that continue to cause damage to the finance community. So then what the next question is like, how do they operate, and how is that evolving over time as well? And it's actually pretty simple, the way of how they operate. It's fairly similar to a modern marketing and sales function, with the difference that instead of a campaign, they launch an attack. So it all starts with lead generation. Who can we target is like the question for these groups. And then when we know who we can target, like what is the information that we can use in these attacks? Then they deploy the attack. And then once the attack has been deployed and successful, how do we get the money out? And they use a network of mule accounts for that as well. So money mules. So just want to take you through some of the screenshots that came out of that Fin7 report, and it gives you an idea of how these groups operate. So it's quite interesting. So how do they think about their leads? This is an actual screenshot of the CRM that Fin7 was using. It comes with like photos of their targets. It has a score. The org chart was in another screen as well. It comes with context, names, job titles, who's reporting into who, and it's quite a rich database of information. And this is a screen that I always like to pause on for a little bit, because I think it's very important for people to understand whenever you are dealing with payments, know that you are in a system like this. If you have a LinkedIn account, that data has been scraped and you are in a system like this, as well as everyone in your team and the businesses that you do business with. It's very easy to get that information and that's being used. So always operate with knowing that. So 7 further enrich that data through various sources, LinkedIn, Zoom Info, Google Doc. They also had 10 different APIs that were building in. One of them was pinging email addresses. So it was looking for out of office notices. So that they use that for timing. So an out of office notice that says, hey, I'm with my family in Hawaii, I'll be back the 9th of December, for instance. They would send a message to their colleagues about on the 7th of December, hey, I just returned home from Hawaii early. Can you please process this payment really quickly? So those are some of the information and the creativity that they would be using, and really trying to get into someone's device as well. So for Fin7, whenever they deployed an attack, they use a software called Remcos. Remcos is like a remote access Trojan. It's really hard to find that on the network. This software is almost freely available online. It's very cheap. Can download it anywhere. You don't even have to go to the dark web for that. Obviously, don't go do that after this call. But it just gives you an idea of how easily accessible these tools are. Even comes with a table where access to these devices is being traded for as little as $3 to corporate devices. Looks like this. Imagine the big gray screen contains the desktop where they can follow everything that's happening on the computer. All the keylogger. It comes with keylogger. Passwords are being tracked and sent to the user. They have access to all the files in a device, and they're using that. They're lurking around, trying to wait for a payment to go to another business. Then in the case of Fin7, if they were successful intercepting a payment or getting that, they were working with a money mule network. And this is really a network of different accounts, different bank accounts, to put distance between them and the defrauded bank account. So at the front of this account, they were using convicted sex criminals in the US. So in the US, there's this register of convicted sex criminals. People are very vulnerable that way. So they're being abused in that sense as well from identity theft. And once that money landed in those accounts, it is purged through different bank accounts, like internationally and locally, and through cryptocurrency. So it makes it very hard to recover funds, and that actually rarely happens as well. So that makes it hard for banks to help you in this area as well. So yeah, then the money comes to their accounts, and they staying far away from the problem, and they enrich themselves that way. So that's in summary a little bit of how these groups operate. 4 steps. Now, what we are seeing now, and this is where Sam Altman has a very strong point about AI, is that every step of this process, AI can enhance this process. So AI, think about AI agents, deep fakes. I'm sure you've heard about that as well, and deploying an army as well. So I want to take you a little bit through that as well. So imagine an AI agent. For those who don't know what an AI agent is, it's like ChatGPT, but it can do stuff. It can learn over time, but it can also send emails. It can make phone calls, and it can pick your business. So we've actually seen an article written about this, I think 2 months ago now. It's called Scam Agent. It's doing the rounds in the cybersecurity community, and it's just a software that gets deployed on a server, automatically uses the rich data that they already have in a CRM, and starts pinging and learning from that automatically, and starts pinging the business, trying to defraud it with all the best practice frauds that information that they also have available. So it's fully automated, no human in the loop, and it's just deployed on a server and continue to go. So that makes it extremely scary because it makes it more scalable as it grows as well. So that's currently happening, and that will continue to evolve. Another one which we've seen, sorry, I went one slide too far, is it's called the business invoice swapper, and it does exactly what it says it does. So it detects the font on an invoice, it detects the bank account details on an invoice in real time, and as it is deployed on someone's inbox, it will automatically change the details, the bank details in real time. This tool is available through Telegram. It's like a encrypted, similar to WhatsApp, but then encrypted, so you can be anonymous on the platform. And it's also very cheap, like $15,000, and you have a lifetime access to this. This is what the software looks like. It's just filters, no technical skills required. And to zoom in on the settings, there's one that says enter starting amount for swapping, where the criminal can put a threshold in for what the amount should be, so that they don't get caught for small amounts if they decide to do so. Then once that all is up and running, they get a screen like this, and they automatically get the alerts whenever there's like something changed successfully, and with the associated invoice. So one of these tools can be installed on 30,000 devices at a time. So we did a bit of an estimate in the office with how many people in Australia would be touching invoices. We think that's about like 600,000 people. That means that 20 people with this tool can start targeting the entire economy, which is pretty scary, but it shows you the scale of these solutions that are happening. Another one is the deepfakes, and the sound might not be working, but this is like a video that somebody in my team created in like an hour or two, and that technology is getting really good, really convincing, really quickly as well. So let me just play that for you. I hope the sound works. If it doesn't, let me know. So yeah, if you see like a year ago, the mimicking and the hand gestures, that wasn't there yet a year ago. Now that's here. The way of how the mouth moves is very convincing. And that technology is going really, really quickly. And it's becoming cheaper to run as well in real time. So obviously we were able to trust each other on Zoom calls with the camera on. In a year's time, will it still be the case, or will somebody be able to change their entire identity for those? It's a question. We'll see where the story ends. Okay, so given all that information, where does that leave us? So we have 4 predictions for the next 2 years. So we think that as the barriers to entry to become a cyber criminal are going up, cost of living across the world is going up as well. So it's becoming more tempting to be involved. Tools are becoming cheaper and better, so the attacks will be more sophisticated. And the way of how these agents are developing is going really fast, making it all a little bit harder for businesses to navigate this environment as well. So at Eftsure, we think there is a response to that. I won't go too deep into the tactical things. I saw Damon has quite a few really good points of advice there. And after all, he is in the CFO role, so he's probably more credible to talk about that. But what can you do as a leader? And I think it all starts with owning it and being responsible. So what we hear a lot when we speak to people in finance is, no, we're really good. We got our controls in place, and our IT team is making sure that we're staying secure from cybercrime. And we think that the CFO should be leading this conversation. Most of these crimes are financially motivated, and as like the protector of the money, as the CFO, you're in the driving seat for this project, for this problem. And then, as we talk about that, I also want to ask everybody the question about like their mindset towards this problem, because we've been able to identify 3 different mindsets, and I wonder where the audience falls into. So the first mindset is the passive mindset, very Australian, like she'll be right. Fraud is not a big issue for us. We hear it quite a lot, actually. And it might be true. Like if you've been a CFO for like more than 10 years and you haven't experienced a fraud, it's a very valid point. So we hear that a lot. The other thing is that we hear is a defender mindset. And that's the mindset of, yes, we're investing in training. We got dedicated processes, protocols to make sure that this doesn't happen to us. And look at this, I've got all the controls in place. We've invested. We're really good. We know what we're doing. So that's the other mindset. A mindset that we actually rarely hear within the finance community is the attacker's mindset. And this is a lesson that we can learn from the cybersecurity space. All the large companies, whenever it comes to tech and protecting that, they have a blue team and a red team. So they employ white hat hackers to make sure that they trying to get into the business and find those vulnerabilities. We rarely do that in finance, where we place like a fake invoice or do a fake gift card request to an employee and see what happens. Is our security as secure as we think it is? So that's something we can learn from another industry. And I think it's like finally, what I want to leave you with is this narrative about the house, your company. See your company as a house. Your IT team is responsible for making sure your network is secure and nobody malicious can get into your organization. And you in the finance team and financial controls are there to make sure that nobody is leaving with money they're not supposed to be. So we help you with that at Eftsure. If you are interested in that, I'm happy to talk more about that. But I think Damon has quite a lot of good advice waiting for this as well. So yeah, I want to like to hand over to Damon.
Thanks, Nick. That was awesome. I think really eye-opening and a little bit scary, if I'm honest. We are now going to take a look through the lens of a CFO and hand over to Damon, who's going to share his perspective on this, including the internal threat landscape and how finance leaders can protect their organization. So Damon, I'll hand over to you.
Excellent. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So look, I'll take a slightly different track to Nick for the next few minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit more about some of the more practical things you can do within your organization and what that looks like. So three broad topics we'll cover today. We will look at the rising complexity and rising fraud environment that CFOs and finance leaders find themselves in today. What does that mean and how is that changing and evolving? We will talk about what the impact of some of that is, not just on the fraud, but also on some of the opportunity costs and lost confidence and trust with other teams that can come from this. And finally, we'll talk about, well, what does it look like if you can get this right and set up? What are the best finance leaders doing? How do they have it set up? And what are they doing differently? So let's jump into it. Look, the reality is if you are a finance leader today in 2025, it is harder than ever to stay on top of the fraud and threat landscape in front of you. There are more technologies. So our IT systems are getting increasingly complex as we enable more and more things to be plugged in. You've got more payment methods. Most businesses out there today have a mix of traditional banking systems. They've probably got some systems with cards, with reimbursements. That combination together means that there is more things to stay on top of. You've got remote and hybrid work, which roll back a few years was a smaller portion of the workforce, but today it's present in almost every workforce, which means that traditional systems, anything paper-based just can't work in that new world. And some of the more traditional things we look for in terms of just that physical connection and body language are harder to pick up when people are working, ultimately meaning that there is more exposure. And we see that in some of the numbers that you see on the right of this slide. 350 million lost to insider fraud in Australia last year, and 2/3 of businesses reporting increased instances of fraud over the last 12 months. So the world is changing. It is hard. And when we were preparing for this, we didn't really have to look hard to find lots of recent examples of where there are real businesses that are really impacted with fraud. And a lot of that is insiders. You've heard Nick talk today about the outsider threat and what that looks like, but often it's actually the insiders in the organization who are already in those elevated positions of trust, who have knowledge of the systems and processes that are able to extract the money. And it is a mix. Like, you look at this slide, there are small businesses that are impacted, but it goes right up to the bigger, very sophisticated organizations like NAB in this example. So I think wherever there are insiders that are trusted, there is always going to be the risk of fraud. And the reality is that landscape is changing quicker than ever with AI. So a lot of the risks that did exist are now more pronounced. It is easier than ever for people to go and generate fake receipts, fake invoices. The quality of those that comes out is really high, and the volume that can be generated from those is really high as well. And I think one interesting thing about the current state of AI is the consumer, like the ChatGPTs and consumer offerings of the language models, are state of the art. This isn't big enterprise software. This is state of the art technology in the hands of team members. And I'll share just a little video as I'm talking here. I'm not sure if the audio is coming through, but clearly what is being shown here is young, less experienced people are able to go out and generate receipts on behalf, on their own volition, using consumer tools like ChatGPT, and they really do look convincing and will catch many people off guard. So you've heard Nick talk about some of those more sophisticated actors and what they're doing, but in parallel, you've got the ability for less experienced, sometimes employees, to go out and do the same thing. And obviously something more for finance teams to stay on top of. All right, so we've talked about that complexity. Well, what does that mean if you are a finance leader in the role today? How does that impact? Well, beyond the tradition, beyond the obvious that there is the risk of fraud, people policing it lose many hours to the noise, like trying to stay on top of it, trying to eliminate the false positives. When something does happen, there is like a scramble to respond and to react and demonstrate that one is on top of it. And ultimately, what we hear from finance leaders is many of them find, as they're trying to do the right thing and stay on top of this, that trust with other parts of the organization starts to erode. Those bonds and relationships that finance leaders and CFOs rely on to drive budgets, to drive excellence and strategic value, falls away as that trust is eroded. And if we look at where CFOs want to spend their time, it's on customers, it's on the strategy. But when we talk to them, we find that most finance leaders find they are spending more time than they would like on the compliance pieces, on the operational pieces of the organization, trying to stay on top of things like fraud. And that in itself has a big opportunity cost and holds them back from their full potential. So having said all that, what do the best finance teams do? What does good, what does great look like? And how does one rise above these threats without exposing the organization to a greater degree of risk? So ultimately, and this may seem a bit paradoxical, but ultimately the aim for many is not to get the fraud to zero. It's almost impossible to eliminate it entirely. What the best teams are trying to do is minimize it, get it to a very manageable level, and ultimately avoid any big surprises in the system. And if we think through that, if you have no fraud at all, you're going to end up with a very bureaucratic environment, an organization where it's hard to get anything done. It's hard for people to exercise agency and make decisions and ultimately add value to the company. If there's no oversight being applied, then the organization just descends into a degree of chaos. And at that point, losses are probably going to eventuate very quickly. Ultimately, the best teams are trying to get to a state where there is a balance between trying to stay on top of the big risks, but also avoid the chaos and letting too many things through the gates. So how do they do this? Well, ultimately, the best state that they're able to get into is where they've got systems, and finance systems in particular, that are doing the thinking for them. So systems that are able to provide real-time visibility on transactions that are going through, so we don't have delays. Systems that have built-in guardrails and checks and balances to try and avoid bad, fraudulent spend before it happens. And automated systems that are able to detect anomalies and things that are outside of the trends that the organization is expecting, and either block them or at least flag them for a human to ultimately review them and take a closer look. And I share Weel and Eftsure on this side largely as illustrative examples rather than to pitch the products directly, but I think both of them illustrate what you're trying to achieve here. In Weel's case, it's largely about getting that real-time visibility available, getting the automated and anomaly detection in place so that bad spend is identified or blocked before it happens. In Eftshure's case, as you've heard from Nick, being able to look through to the suppliers before you pay them to make sure that the details that you're looking at align to what is expected and what Eftsure has observed in its diligence of those providers in the past, so that you block it before the bad spend happens. Both examples of things that can be put in place in a largely automated manner and take away from that more manual work for finance leaders over time. Now, why does that matter? Well, ultimately, the next generation of CFOs and finance leaders are going to be out there leading by design. This traditional concept of the CFO as the approver with the rubber stamp that has to give their blessing to each spend is a very time-consuming, largely antiquated process and path. What the best teams are doing is moving away from improvised ad hoc approvals to well-engineered, well-architected designs, tech stacks and processes, moving from a reactive state where they're looking at things after the fact to proactively engineering systems to identify it. And ultimately, and I think most importantly, moving within the organization from being seen as the gatekeeper, the custodian of the funds, to a collaborator, someone that people look forward to working with, someone that can help each of the functional areas of the business to unlock and achieve their potential. Now, if you're able to get these systems in place, you're also going to get more time, and more time enables much more strategic value add for finance leaders and CFOs in the organization. That looks like space to lead, to spend time with the team, spend time with the company and drive and set strategy, space to learn. We've talked today about, emergence of AI, the growing cybersecurity threats. Well, these are areas that require investment and time, and, leaders themselves need to give themselves the time to educate themselves and build fluency in those emerging areas. And finally, space to grow. Ultimately help the organization reach its potential, help individuals reach their potential. Again, we didn't have to look hard. There are many examples of companies broadening the responsibilities of CFOs to recognize the potential contribution they can make. And ultimately, in many cases, seeing them as potential successors to the CEO, just given that broad remit and understanding they have of the organization. So look, I'll wrap it up there. We've talked about the complexity is rising, the risk around fraud is rising, the threat vectors and means are rising. Many of those come from insiders. It's not just the fraud, it is all the lost opportunity, cost and time and trust that gets eroded if you don't have the right system set up. And ultimately that the best teams and CFOs and finance leaders today have got great systems in place to help automate those things, working towards being seen as collaborators with the wider business. So look, I'll stop my remarks there. Shauna and Nick, and happy to talk through it or take any questions.
Yeah. And just as a reminder, if you've got questions, drop them in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll answer some of them today. I had a quick one for you, Damon. When we talk about internal threats, for the audience, can you identify, first of all, what are they and what they should be looking out for?
Well, can you hear me? So look, I think, Shauna, it can be a mix. If I think through some of the examples that I see and I hear people talk about, card sharing is a big one. So, there is a company card, multiple people are using the same card. There's now a lack of transparency or accountability on who actually is in possession of the card and if a bad spend happens, who actually made it. So that would be one. Unauthorized spending or out of policy spending. So where you've got examples of out of policy travel costs or ad hoc expenses by team and employers. Human error is a big one. Simple mistakes, data errors is something we see a lot, and ultimately undermines confidence in the system and processes. Incorrect supplier payments, so paying the wrong vendor or thinking you're paying the right vendor, but actually sending it to the wrong bank account, which is clearly something that Nick and his organization help solve. Duplication, so there's multiple ChatGPT subscriptions in the organization. Multiple people have gone and set up their own accounts. No unification of that and visibility for finance leaders of synergies from joining those together. And I guess traditional fake, false, unauthorized reimbursement claims. So someone take that TikTok video example. Someone figures out how to create fake fake receipts and starts putting in fraudulent reimbursement claims, which can be hard to detect if you're just doing reimbursements because it looks and feels real, and you probably trust that employee, but ultimately the organization is now out of pocket. So look, they're probably some of the real life examples, Shauna, I'd see day to day.
Yeah, great. And this might be one for Nick maybe, or yourself, Damon, but are there any early signals that finance leaders can look out for when it comes to fraud, cybersecurity threats, or is it more about the prevention of and setting yourself up so that you're in a position where it's not going to happen?
Well, look, I'd probably say my first comment there is a cultural one, right? I think if you can get the right culture in the organization, you end up with everyone in the organization taking a role and having a common understanding of what good looks like or what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. And in that world, it can transcend just the finance team thinking and doing this, because everyone now understands what is at stake and what matters, and everyone is kind of the eyes and ears for you. So I think your early warning signs, it would be where you are hearing or observing people in the organization talk about or exhibit behaviors that don't align with the culture you would expect. I think that is perhaps the first step towards things going off the rails a little bit.
Yeah, and if I may add to the culture part, because I think that's crucial when it comes to these things, is whenever, like, inevitably it can happen to anyone, like fraud or crime, especially from external ones, speaking on through that lens. It's a matter when that happens, what is the response of people? So do they keep it quiet because they are embarrassed or they're fearful for their job? The longer like these problems linger, the underlying problems linger in your business, the harder it is to resolve them and the more costly they usually tend to be. So make sure there's like a very high shame threshold in your company culture where people say like, hey, I think I clicked on something wrong. Like, can we check this together? And they're willing to come forward with that. And it's not it's not something that gets them into a bad performance review or something like that. That's usually a really big one.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And Damon, I'm curious to hear your take. I guess we heard from Nick a lot about cybersecurity threats. But from your perspective as a finance leader, what's your take? Does it make you worried? Like looking at
So yeah, I think that is a really interesting question. I think the answer to that has changed a lot. If you look at like top skills that finance leaders and CFOs are trying to educate themselves on today, usually top of that list is AI that you would expect, but usually second is like cyber and information security. And I think there is a growing recognition across the finance community that this is a discipline, this is a responsibility that often falls to finance leaders. And yes, certainly in my conversations, I see a lot of people building their fluency and literacy around these topics and trying to get upskilled. And I don't, it's not, I think every organization in 2025 will have some degree of digitalized or cloud-based operations. So it is a risk and a threat that every organization needs to be aware of. And they're not just finance risks. There are many other things that can go wrong with a bad actor getting into your systems. So look, my response, Shauna, would be, I think everyone is trying to build their understanding and familiarity with this as quickly as possible at the moment. And I think, there's some really practical things people can do around this. I think for bigger organizations, they will lean towards, certifications, your ISO 27001 and SOC 2 type things. But a step before that is there are some great practical frameworks and guardrails that the Australian government, among others, publishes that can give people a little bit of a baseline or some basic controls they can work towards, which will go a long way towards securing the organisation. So something I definitely think an area that is of growing interest.
Yeah. I'm just looking through the questions. We had one come through for Nick, which says, you mentioned the overall estimated fraud that goes unreported is around 5 times higher. Could you share some insights on the types of fraud attempts that were actually detected and prevented? And what measures or systems were the most effective in stopping those? So you probably can't go into too much detail on that, but any examples of things you've seen stop in tracks?
Yes. So obviously, like we can't go too deep into the proprietary of our system the moment we talk about a control that renders it useless, because then people know how to go around it.
Yeah.
But yes, we see like attempts like almost every other week, and the numbers like vary between like small numbers to really large payments, and they're across different industries. What we see as well, there's like always like some industrial month or something like that. So it could be like there's somebody is like we're gonna do a targeted campaign towards his set of industry, and then there's like a few alerts that pop up at that time. What we see is very sophisticated voice cloning. They're creating a lot of confusion within a business, within the communication. That's usually what starts creating confusion. And then they get access to someone's email account. So it could be with a vendor. That's one that we see a lot. And then all of a sudden the payment is being pulled forward, and then they try to get into through our system workflows as well, and we stop it there. So it comes in various ways. We're always creative in like we've always like surprised in like the creativity that these people use. Yeah. So no one size fits all answer here, unfortunately. But yeah. Also like that kind of leads me to the next question as well, which I really want to address because it's a question that comes up a lot. Is from Rajiv. It's the question of like with the banks introducing confirmation of payee in their own system, what does Eftsure come in, and isn't it already covered by the banks? So for those not familiar with what confirmation of payee is, what the banks are doing, the banks are putting now, if you pay like through your consumer app, you're getting a question like, hey, wait a minute, like we think this matched the intended recipient, the details match the intended recipient. So that solution is really good. We have nothing bad to say about confirmation of payee. It's a really good source of data, but that's where it's at, and it's also like very suitable for consumers. Like the difference, the problems that we see for businesses to emerge is when they solely rely on confirmation of payee. There's a few issues for businesses to go over. So the first one is like you only get that information at the point of payment. So what the banks, so like this payment is incorrect, or it may be incorrect. The banks also don't take any liability on that, but they say it may be incorrect. What you then have to do is at that moment, you have to go back into your organization. You have to do the forensics of how did this data get into my business? What should I do now in order to make sure that it's correct? And then what the advice of the bank is like, hey, do the manual phone call again. So the controls that you had in place, you now have to go back to see whether they check, and you have to do that when the payment run is done. Then after you then have confirmed whether the details are correct, you can't change the icon from orange to green. So what we've seen in Europe, this has been running for a while as well. We're also active in Europe. When that match rate is about 80 or 90%, and you have 10% of your alerts or your payment run are inconclusive, can you trust them? Like then you start creating edge cases. So where Eftsure comes in is like we make sure that everything is green when you pay, so you can trust all our alerts, and that's a huge difference in that way. And then we do that throughout. The moment you onboard a new vendor, so we make sure that the data that you have at the start of you get exposed to the data is always accurate, all the way to the payment, and then additionally, and finally, to put the final sales spiel on, we guarantee that. So banks don't take any liability on the alerts. It's still up to you, and if it goes wrong, you are liable. We have a liability. We have a guarantee, and we guarantee up to $1 million in a fraud attempt as well. So it really covers you, and you'll be able to transfer that risk to us instead of seeing it as a signal from the banks. So I hope that explains it a little bit, the difference and the value that we bring.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for the context, Nick. Great to have that extra layer of protection. Well, we are just over time. So if you would like to hear more about Weel or Eftsure or both, please let us know in the poll and we can send you some more information. We hope you found today's session valuable and that it's opened your eyes and hasn't scared you too much. But yeah, important to stay on top of the changing landscape. I think I'll just give you a moment to opt into the poll. And a huge thank you to both Nick and Damon for giving up an hour of your very busy, very busy days. All right, still got people jumping in the poll, so I don't want to close it just yet. We'll just give it 30 more seconds. All right, there we go. Fantastic. Well, thank you for joining us today, everyone. We'll send a copy of the recording out this afternoon. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your afternoons. Thanks again.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.